Myanmar, once known as Burma, is today enduring one of the most devastating collapses of any country in the modern world. To understand why this nation is dying, we must look at the roots of its crisis, its political failures, its ethnic divisions, its humanitarian tragedies, and the silence of the international community that has allowed it all to spiral out of control. The story begins in February 2021, when Myanmar's fragile experiment with democracy came to a sudden end. For nearly a decade, after years of brutal military dictatorship, the country had slowly begun opening up. Citizens felt hope that their voices finally mattered as elections brought Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy to power. But that dream was shattered when the military, unwilling to let go of control, staged a coup. Soldiers stormed government offices, arrested leaders, and declared themselves the rightful rulers. For millions of ordinary people, this was a betrayal of everything they had fought for. They flooded the streets in protest, waving banners, chanting for freedom, and demanding the return of democracy. The response was swift and merciless. Soldiers fired live rounds into crowds, rounded up activists, and carried out mass detentions and torture. But rather than crushing resistance, the coup ignited a firestorm. Across the country, civilians began forming local defense forces. Long-standing ethnic militias, some of which had fought against the central government for decades, joined the uprising. What began as peaceful protests turned into an armed revolution, plunging Myanmar into civil war. The conflict spread quickly across towns and villages, and soon the entire nation became a battlefield between the military junta and a growing network of resistance groups. The human cost has been staggering. In just a few years, more than 80,000 people have been killed. Over 3 million men, women, and children have been forced from their homes, fleeing to forests, borderlands, or refugee camps in neighboring countries. Families are split apart, with children growing up in makeshift shelters, lacking access to proper food, education, or healthcare. The economy has collapsed, shrinking by nearly 20%, leaving millions unemployed and impoverished. What was once Southeast Asia's rising frontier economy is now shattered, with inflation soaring, basic goods scarce, and international investment fleeing. The military, despite its brutality, is losing control. Today, it governs only about a fifth of the country's territory. Vast areas are effectively ruled by resistance forces, turning Myanmar into a fragmented state, split between rival powers. Yet Myanmar's suffering did not begin in 2021. The seeds of division were planted decades earlier. The country is home to more than 135 ethnic groups, each with their own languages, traditions, and histories. For generations, these groups struggled for recognition and autonomy against a central government that often sought to suppress them. Among these conflicts, one stands out as particularly horrific: the persecution of the Rohingya. In 2017, the Myanmar military launched a brutal campaign against this Muslim minority living in Rakhine State. Villages were torched, women assaulted, and thousands killed. Nearly 1 million Rohingya fled across the border to Bangladesh, where they remain stranded in overcrowded refugee camps. Today, they are one of the largest stateless populations in the world, denied citizenship in Myanmar and unwanted elsewhere. The memory of their suffering remains a stain on the nation and a reminder of how ethnic conflict has fueled Myanmar's downfall. As if political collapse and ethnic violence were not enough, nature has also struck cruelly. In March 2025, Myanmar was rocked by a massive earthquake measuring 7.7 on the Richter scale. The tremors devastated already fragile towns and villages, collapsing hospitals, schools, and homes. Roads were cut off, leaving survivors trapped and desperate. Relief efforts struggled to reach those in need as war zones and damaged infrastructure made aid deliveries nearly impossible. For a country already bleeding from war, the earthquake was a disaster within a disaster, worsening the humanitarian crisis and leaving millions in even deeper despair. Geopolitics has only added to Myanmar's tragedy. The nation holds immense strategic value, located between China and India with access to the Bay of Bengal. China, in particular, has long sought to secure pipelines, infrastructure, and trade routes through Myanmar as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. To protect its interests, Beijing has quietly played both sides, supporting the military junta while also maintaining ties with certain ethnic armed groups. For China, stability matters less than access and influence. Meanwhile, the wider world has mostly looked away. While conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza dominate headlines, Myanmar's war receives little coverage. Western powers have imposed sanctions on the military regime, but enforcement is weak and aid to the suffering population is minimal. International organizations warn of catastrophe, but global attention remains elsewhere. For many outside observers, Myanmar has become a forgotten war unfolding in silence. What does the future hold? 3 scenarios seem possible, and each carries its own risks. The first is endless civil war, where neither side wins and Myanmar continues to bleed for decades, much like Afghanistan or Syria. The second is a fragile democratic victory in which the resistance manages to defeat the junta and rebuild the country. But this outcome requires unity among deeply divided groups, something that history history suggests is unlikely. The third possibility is total collapse, a failed state where the central government loses all authority, and Myanmar fragments into territories ruled by militias, warlords, and ethnic armies. At this moment, all three futures remain possible, and none of them offer an easy path forward. Through all this darkness, one thing remains constant: the resilience of Myanmar's people. From the protesters who risked their lives against tanks in 2021, to the families who continue to survive in refugee camps, to the doctors, teachers, and volunteers who provide aid despite the dangers, ordinary citizens have refused to surrender their hope. They continue to dream of a free and united nation, even as the world looks away. Myanmar is a country of extraordinary beauty, rich in culture, history, and natural resources. But it has been cursed by decades of dictatorship, poisoned by ethnic divisions, and abandoned by global powers. Its story is one of tragedy, but also of resistance. The question that hangs in the air is whether Myanmar can ever be reborn, or whether it will remain a dying nation, torn apart, silenced, and forgotten by history.